There is a clock in the kitchen. It has been there for 11 years now, mounted above the doorframe, where the light from the window reaches it in the late morning. I bought it at a hardware store because the one before it had stopped, and I needed something to replace the silence where time used to be marked. I did not choose it carefully. I was in a hurry. I had other things to do that day, and the clock was simply the first one I saw that seemed adequate. I paid for it, brought it home, put a battery in it, and hung it on the wall. I do not remember the rest of that afternoon, but I remember the hurt. I remember the way my hands moved quickly as I positioned the nail, as I checked the level with a glance rather than a measurement, as I pressed the clock into place and stepped back just long enough to confirm it was hanging straight. And then I left the room. I moved on to whatever else was waiting. I do not know what was waiting. I only know that something was, and that I moved toward it, with the familiar sense that there was not enough time to stay where I was. Now I look at that clock often, not to check the time. I look at it the way one looks at an old photograph, not to remember what happened, but to remember that something happened, and that the person in the picture was me, and that the moment captured there is gone and will not return. The clock is ordinary. Its face is white. Its numbers are black. Its second hand moves in the small, patient jerks that all such clocks make, ticking forward one beat at a time, never pausing, never slowing, never speeding up. I used to ignore that sound, or rather, I used to hear it without noticing it. The way one hears traffic or rain or the hum of a refrigerator. It was background. It was underneath everything else. Now I hear it differently. Now it enters the room the way a voice enters the room not loudly, not insistently, but present, distinct, a companion to whatever I happened to be doing at the time. I do not know when that changed. I do not know if it changed slowly, over years, or if there was a single morning when I noticed the ticking for what felt like the first time, and could not go back to not hearing it. I suspect it was slow. I suspect it was so slow that I did not feel it happening. One does not feel the turning of the earth. One does not feel the gradual settling of a house. One does not feel the shift from one kind of attention to another until something small, a sound, a glance, a pause that lasts a beat longer than expected, makes the difference visible. I used to rush. I say that simply, without judgment, because it is true. I used to move through my days as though I were trying to outrun them. I woke in the morning with a list already forming in my mind, and I began the day's tasks before my feet touched the floor. I brushed my teeth while thinking of what I had to do next. I ate breakfast while reading something I had told myself I needed to read. I drove to work while rehearsing conversations I might have later. I spoke on the phone while checking messages. I listened to friends while composing my response. I finished one thing and turned immediately to the next, and the next, and the next, as though stillness were a debt and motion were the only way to pay it off. I do not remember deciding to live that way. I do not remember being taught it, though perhaps I was. I do not remember believing it was correct, though perhaps I did. I only remember the sensation of it, the leaning forward, the half-attention, the sense that wherever I was, I should already be somewhere else, doing something else, becoming something else. And now I do not rush. I do not say that with satisfaction. I do not say it as an achievement or a discovery. I say it the way one might say that the weather has changed, or that a neighbor has moved away, or that the tree in the yard has grown taller than the house. It is a fact. It is what happened. It is not something I did. It is something that occurred. I do not know why. That is what I have been sitting with lately. Not the fact that I no longer rush, but the question of why. Not the meaning of it, not the lesson in it, not what it might suggest about age or time or the shape of a human life. Just the simple, stubborn question. Why does urgency fade? I have no answer. I am not looking for one. I am only noticing that the question is here, that it has been here for some time now, and that I have stopped trying to push past it. I have stopped treating it as something to solve. It sits in the room, like the ticking of the clock, present, patient, asking nothing. Some mornings I wake before the sun, and instead of rising immediately, I stay in the dark. I listen to the quiet. I feel the weight of the blanket on my chest. I do not think about what I need to do. I do not review my plans or check the time. I simply remain. And the odd thing, the thing I still do not fully understand, is that I do not feel restless. I do not feel that I should be elsewhere. I feel only that I am here, and that here is enough for now. It was not always so. I remember lying awake in my 30s, in my 40s, my mind racing through problems, calculations, worries, plans. I remember the urgency that arrived with the first light, the sensation that the day was already behind me, that I had to move fast just to catch up. I remember the tightness in my chest, the quick, shallow breaths, the restless legs that wanted to be moving before I had decided where to go. That is not a criticism. That is not regret. It is only what was true. I lived inside that urgency the way a fish lives inside water. I did not question it. I did not examine it. I did not even see it clearly. Because to see something clearly, you have to stand apart from it. And I could not stand apart. I was too close. I was too much inside it. Now I am outside. Or perhaps that is not quite right. Perhaps I have not moved outside so much as the water has drained away, slowly, over years, leaving me standing in air I did not know was there. The urgency did not leave all at once. It did not announce itself or say goodbye. It simply became less. Day by day, month by month, year by year, the current that used to carry me forward weakened, until one morning I realized I was no longer moving with it. I was standing still, and I did not feel stranded. I did not feel lost. I felt only that this too was where I was meant to be. Not meant in any grand sense, not meant as destiny or fate, but meant as in, this is simply where the river deposited me, and here I remain. The clock ticks. The light shifts. The morning passes. I pour a cup of coffee and carry it to the window. The street outside is empty, though it will not be for long. Soon the cars will begin to pass. The neighbors will emerge. The noise of the day will rise like a tide. But for now, there is only this: the steam rising from the cup, the cool glass against my palm, the quiet. I do not need to be anywhere. I do not need to do anything. This is not peace. I want to be careful about that. I do not want to call it peace, because peace suggests resolution, suggests an ending, suggests that some struggle has concluded and some reward has been given. This is not that. This is not the absence of struggle. It is not a victory over anything. It is simply a pause that has stretched into permanence, a stillness that arrived without explanation and has not yet left. Why does urgency fade? I do not know, but I have stopped needing to know. And perhaps that too is part of the answer. Not the answer itself, but part of the landscape where the answer might live, if there is an answer at all. Perhaps the fading of urgency includes, as one of its quiet symptoms, the fading of the need to understand everything, the fading of the impulse to explain and justify and trace each change back to its origin. Or perhaps not. Perhaps I am simply describing what I observe, and the observation itself is not evidence of anything larger. The clock ticks. The coffee cools in my hands. The day opens ahead of me like a hallway with many doors, and I feel no pressure to open any of them. They are there. They will remain there. And when I am ready, if I am ready, I will step toward one. But not yet. For now, I am only here, in this room, with this question that will not be answered, this silence that will not be filled, this time that moves forward at its own pace, whether I rush or not. And I do not rush, not anymore. There is a way of walking that I have almost forgotten. It is the walking of someone who is late, or who believes they are late, or who cannot shake the feeling that lateness is always near. The pace is quick, but not quite running. The shoulders lean forward, pulling the body along. The eyes look ahead, but do not see. They are fixed on the destination, not the ground beneath the feet, not the sky above, not the faces passing in the opposite direction. I walked that way for decades. I walked that way through airports and office hallways and grocery store aisles. I walked that way through neighborhoods I never learned because I was moving too fast to notice them. Through seasons I did not feel because I was already thinking about the next one. Through years that passed like scenery glimpsed from a train window. I do not walk that way now. When I leave the house, I step slowly. I feel the sidewalk beneath my shoes. I notice the cracks in the pavement, the weeds pushing up between them, the way the light falls through the leaves of the oak tree 3 doors down. I am not going anywhere in particular. Or if I am, the arrival matters less than the going. I have begun to understand walking as its own activity, complete in itself, rather than as the interval between one place and another. This was not a decision. This was not something I read about or chose to practice. It happened the way sleep happens, gradually, imperceptibly, until suddenly one is on the other side of wakefulness and cannot remember crossing over. I remember walking quickly. I remember the sensation of purpose in my legs, the determination in my stride. I remember feeling that stillness was wasteful, that pausing was falling behind, that the body was a vehicle meant to be driven hard. I do not miss that feeling, but I also do not resent it. It was what I knew. It was the only way I understood to move through a world that seemed to demand constant motion. Now my body has its own ideas. My knees, which have carried me through more miles than I could ever count, speak up when I push too hard. My back, which held me upright through decades of sitting and standing and bending, asks for rest more often than it used to. My breath, which once came easily even during exertion, now reminds me of itself. Reminds me that it is not infinite, that it must be tended and not taken for granted. I do not experience this as loss. I do not experience this as decline. I experience it as information, as the body telling me something it has always known, but I was too distracted to hear. Slow down, it says, not because slowness is virtuous, not because rushing was wrong, just because this is the pace that works now. This is the rhythm that matches what I have become. I sit in a chair by the window, and I do not rise for an hour. This would have been unthinkable once. An hour of sitting, with nothing to read, nothing to watch, nothing to accomplish. I would have called it wasted time. I would have felt the itch in my legs, the restlessness in my hands, the voice in my mind urging me to be useful, to be productive, to be something other than still. That voice is quieter now. It has not disappeared. It still speaks, occasionally, in the old language of efficiency and purpose. But I have stopped obeying it automatically. I have stopped leaping up at its command. I notice it the way I notice a television playing in another room. Present, audible, but not requiring my attention. I do not know when I stopped obeying. I do not know if there was a day, a week, a month when the balance shifted. I only know that it has shifted. The voice speaks, and I remain seated. The voice urges, and I do not move. And gradually, with the patience of water wearing down stone, the voice speaks less often. There is a feeling in the body that I have come to recognize. It is the feeling of not needing to be anywhere else. It is the feeling of the weight of the bones, the looseness of the muscles, the quiet rhythm of the heart. It is not relaxation. Exactly, relaxation implies effort, implies a releasing of tension that was held. This is something else. This is the absence of tension before it gathers. This is the body at rest, not because it is recovering from motion, but because rest is its natural state. I do not know if this is age. I do not know if this is something else. I do not know if the fading of urgency is written into the body the way hair turns gray and skin turns soft, or if it is something I've arrived at through experience, through the accumulation of years, through the slow education of time. Perhaps it does not matter. I have stopped asking the body to justify itself. I have stopped demanding explanations. The body does what it does, and I follow. In the mornings, I stretch, not for exercise, not for health, not for any benefit beyond the feeling of stretching itself. I extend my arms above my head. I feel the pull along my sides. I twist gently left, then right, and listen to the sounds my spine makes. Clicks and creaks that I have known for years now, familiar as the voice of an old friend. I hold each stretch longer than I used to, not because holding longer is better, not because I have learned some technique, just because I do not feel the pull to let go. The urgency that once said, hurry, move on, finish, is not present. So I remain. I stay in the stretch until it ends on its own, until the body decides it has had enough and softens back to neutral. This is not discipline. This is not mindfulness. I distrust those words. They suggest systems, methods, things to be practiced and perfected. This is nothing so organized. This is only what happens when the rushing stops. I eat slowly now, not because I have decided to eat slowly, not because I have read that eating slowly is healthy, but because there is no reason to eat quickly, no meeting to get to, no task pressing at my back, just the food on the plate, the fork in my hand, the taste of each bite as it enters my mouth and becomes part of me. I notice things about food that I never noticed before, the way bread tears, the way butter melts, the way certain flavors reveal themselves only after the chewing stops, when the tongue is still and the mouth is quiet. I did not know food could be this present. I did not know eating could be this slow. I do not call this savoring. That word suggests intention, suggests that I'm extracting pleasure deliberately. This is not deliberate. This is only what happens when I do not rush. My hands move more slowly than they used to. I notice this when I tie my shoes, when I button my shirt, when I fold a towel, or open an envelope. The fingers that once flew through such tasks now proceed at their own pace, and I watch them as though they belong to someone else. Who is this person, I think, who takes so long with such simple things? And then I remember, this person is me. This is who I have become. I do not know if my hands have always moved this slowly, and I simply never noticed, or if the slowing is recent. I suspect it is both. I suspect the slowing has been happening for years, so gradually that each day's pace seemed natural, seemed normal, seemed like the only speed there was. And I suspect that I never noticed, because I was too busy rushing to look. Now I look. I watch my hands button a button, and I am astonished by the complexity of motion, the coordination of thumb and finger, the pressure and release, the way the fabric resists and then yields. This is not simple. This has never been simple. I just thought it was simple because I was not paying attention. Attention is strange. For most of my life, I believed I was paying attention. I believed I was present, engaged, aware. But now I see that what I called attention was more like monitoring a shallow scan of the surface, enough to avoid collision, enough to complete the task, not enough to actually see what was there. Real attention, I have discovered, is slow. It does not rush to conclusions. It does not race ahead to the next thing. It stays. It remains. It asks nothing of its object, except permission to look a little longer. I am not good at this kind of attention. I do not claim to have mastered it. I only know that it has become more possible as the rushing has faded. Without the urgency pushing from behind, I can stop. I can look. I can let the moment last until it ends on its own. There is a discomfort in this sometimes. Old habits do not disappear completely. The part of me that spent decades rushing still wakes occasionally, still stirs, still whispers that I should be doing something, accomplishing something, moving towards some goal. I feel it as a tension in my shoulders, a tightness in my jaw. I feel it as the beginning of motion, the first leaning toward the next thing. But I have learned to wait, not to fight the tension, not to resist the old habit, just to wait, to let it rise like a wave and crest and fall away, to notice it without obeying, to feel the urgency without being driven by it. This is not strength. This is not willpower. It is only what happens when the urgency has faded enough that it no longer commands. It still speaks, but I no longer believe that its commands are mine. I no longer believe that I am the one who wants to rush. I see now that the rushing was its own creature, its own habit, its own momentum, and I see that it is possible to stand beside it rather than inside it. My feet hurt sometimes in the mornings. This is new, or relatively new. The ache in the soles, the stiffness in the ankles. I used to leap out of bed. I used to hit the ground moving. Now I sit on the edge of the mattress and wait for my feet to remember how to work. I flex them, rotate them, press them against the cool floor. I give them time. Time was something I never gave. Time was something I was always taking, stealing, racing against. The idea of giving time, offering it freely, without expecting anything in return, would have seemed absurd. Time was a resource. Time was money. Time was never enough. Now time is what I have, not unlimited. I am not naive about that. I know that the years ahead are fewer than the years behind. I know that the body will continue its slow closing, its gradual return to stillness. But within each day, time has expanded. An hour feels like an hour now, not like a fragment, not like a sliver. A morning lasts a morning. An afternoon is its own country. I do not know how to explain this. I do not know the mechanism. I only know that when the rushing stopped, the hours grew longer. Not objectively, the clock still marks the same 60 minutes. But subjectively, experientially, inside my own perception, time has opened. There is room in it now. Room to sit without sitting. Room to look without rushing. Room to be without becoming something else. My body knows things I do not know. I have come to trust this. I have come to believe that the slowing is not a failure, but a form of intelligence. The body has been keeping time for longer than I have been consciously aware. It knows the rhythms of the day, the rhythms of the year, the rhythm of a life. And now, in its own way, it is telling me this is the pace. This is what matches where you are. I do not argue. I do not try to move faster than the body wants to move. I do not try to convince the knees to bend more quickly, the back to straighten more sharply, the breath to come more easily. I follow. And in the following, I find that the world slows with me. The cup of coffee stays warm longer than I expected. The walk to the corner takes exactly as long as it takes. The day unfolds at its own pace, and I am no longer trying to outrun it. The clock ticks in the kitchen. The sound is no longer background. It is present, and so am I. I remember the feeling of having too much to do. This is not nostalgia. This is not longing. It is simply what I remember the sensation of a day already full before it began, of tasks stacked against each other, like books piled too high on a shelf, threatening to topple at any moment. I remember the lists I kept, handwritten at first, then typed, then stored on devices that were supposed to help me keep track of everything, but instead just made the everything more visible, more pressing, more present. I remember waking to the list. I remember the list waiting for me before my eyes fully opened, floating in the darkness behind my lids, like a ghost that refused to leave. I remember the first moments of consciousness, being occupied not by the body waking, not by the light entering the room, but by the silent recitation of what needed to be done. This first, then this, then this, then, if there was time, if there was any time left, perhaps this, though probably not, because there was never time. Never enough. The list was my companion. The list was my measure. If the list was short, I felt capable, competent, briefly in control. If the list was long, I felt overwhelmed, but also strangely important, as though the length of the list proved something about my value, my necessity, my place in the world. I did not question this logic. I did not examine it. I lived inside it, and it seemed like the only way to live. I remember rushing because the list demanded rushing. I remember the way tasks blurred into each other, the way finishing one thing meant immediately beginning another, the way completion was never completion, but only the clearing of space for the next demand. I do not know if I enjoyed this. Enjoyment is perhaps the wrong question. It was what I knew. It was the shape of my days. There was satisfaction in crossing things off. I remember that the physical pleasure of a line drawn through a task, the brief moment of accomplishment before the next task rose to take its place. The satisfaction was real. It was not fake or manufactured. But it was brief. So brief that by the time I noticed it, it was already fading. Already replaced by the awareness of what remained undone. I lived in the undone. That is what I understand now, looking back. I lived not in what I had accomplished, but in what I had yet to accomplish. Not in the present task, but in the future tasks waiting their turn. My attention was always divided, always partial, always leaning forward toward the next thing. I do not know when this started. I suspect it started early. I suspect I learned it the way one learns a language, by immersion, by repetition, by watching the adults around me and absorbing their rhythms. Without knowing I was absorbing anything. I suspect my parents rushed. I suspect their parents rushed. I suspect the rushing goes back generations, passed down like an inheritance that no one ever questioned, because everyone assumed it was simply how life was lived. But I am not certain. Memory is unreliable. Memory rewrites itself, edits itself, tells stories that serve the present more than the past. Perhaps I have constructed a history of rushing that is neater than the truth. Perhaps the truth was more complicated. Days of rushing alongside days of stillness. Periods of urgency alternating with periods of calm. Perhaps I rush now to simplify, ironically, what cannot be simplified. What I know for certain is the feeling of hurry, the feeling of being behind even when ahead, of being late even when on time, of never quite catching up to the life I was trying to live. I carried that feeling in my chest. It was physical, not just mental. A tightness, a pressure, a readiness for motion that never fully relaxed. I felt it when I sat down to eat and my leg bounced beneath the table. I felt it when I lay down to sleep and my mind continued running through the list. I felt it in the moments that were supposed to be restful vacations, holidays, weekends when the list did not disappear, but only went underground, waiting. I do not carry it now, or rather, I carry it less. The chest is quieter. The readiness for motion has softened into something else. An availability, perhaps. A willingness to move if movement is needed, but not the constant coiled tension of before. I notice the difference the way one notices the absence of a sound that was so constant it became inaudible. For years, there was a hum. Now the hum is gone, and the silence it leaves behind is startling. I do not know if the hum will return. I do not know if this quietness is permanent or temporary, a phase or a destination. I only know that for now, it is here. For now, the chest is soft. For now, the list does not wake me. I still have things to do. I have not withdrawn from life. There are groceries to buy, and bills to pay, and phone calls to make. There are appointments on the calendar, obligations to meet, small tasks that accumulate the way dust accumulates, quietly and without malice. But the relationship has changed. The tasks no longer press, they wait. And I find that most things can wait. This was the discovery. If discovery is the right word. Most of the urgency was invented. Most of the rushing was self-imposed. The list told me that everything was equally pressing, that all tasks demanded immediate attention, that delay was failure. But the list was wrong. The list was a story I told myself. And stories can be told differently. I do not mean to diminish real deadlines. There are moments when urgency is appropriate, when lives depend on swift action, when delay would cause genuine harm. I am not talking about those moments. I am talking about the ordinary days, the ordinary tasks, the ordinary pressure to hurry that filled my life for decades without ever being examined. Why was I rushing to answer emails? Why was I rushing to return phone calls? Why was I rushing to clean the house, to mow the lawn, to finish the report, to check the boxes, to prove over and over again that I was keeping up? I do not know. I suspect I was rushing because everyone else seemed to be rushing, and I did not want to be left behind. I suspect I was rushing because stillness felt dangerous, felt like falling behind, felt like being forgotten. I suspect I was rushing because the rushing itself had become a habit so deep that I could no longer distinguish it from who I was. Now I am learning to distinguish. The rushing was not me. The rushing was something I did, something I learned, something that occupied me for so long that I mistook it for my nature. But it was not my nature, it was a behavior, and behaviors can change. I do not say this triumphantly. I do not present it as a lesson learned or a battle won. The change was not my doing. Not in any deliberate sense. I did not decide to stop rushing. I did not practice stillness or train myself in slowness. Something shifted in my body, in my circumstances, in the world, or in my relationship to it, and the rushing became less automatic. The coiled tension released. Not all at once, but gradually. And one day I realized I was no longer running. I was walking. I was sitting. I was standing still, and the world continued. The tasks waited. The emails remained in the inbox. The phone calls stayed unmade, and nothing collapsed. Nothing fell apart. The feared consequences of slowing down, the falling behind, the being forgotten, the failure, did not materialize. Or if they did, they mattered less than I had imagined. This is not advice. I am not telling anyone else to slow down. I do not know their lives. I do not know their pressures. I do not know what real urgencies they face, what genuine demands require their speed. I am only describing what happened to me, in my own life, in my own time. The rushing faded, and what remains is this: a morning, a window, a cup of coffee. A question that does not demand an answer. I remember the future I used to imagine. It was always crowded. It was always full of things to achieve, things to become, things to prove. The future was where the real life would happen, after this task was done, after this goal was met, after this promotion or move or milestone was reached. The present was only preparation. The present was the means to an end. I do not imagine the future that way anymore. Not because the future has disappeared. It is still there, still coming, still bringing whatever it will bring, but it no longer feels like the destination. It no longer feels like the place where life will finally begin. Life is here. Life is now. Life is in the hand holding the coffee, the breath entering the lungs, the light moving across the wall. This is not wisdom. I want to be careful. It is not wisdom because wisdom suggests understanding, suggests knowledge gained through effort, suggests something that can be passed on. This is not that. This is only what I see when I stop rushing long enough to look. I see the present moment, and it is sufficient. I see the task in front of me, and it does not require hurry. I see the list, and the list is just a list. Not a measure of my worth, not a standard I must meet. Just marks on paper, just reminders, just possibilities. The morning continues. The light shifts. Somewhere outside, a car passes. Someone on their way to somewhere important or not important. Rushing or not rushing. Living their own relationship with time. I sit in my chair and do not move. The not moving is not laziness. The not moving is not giving up. The not moving is simply what happens when the urgency fades and nothing rises to take its place. There is space here. There is room. I had forgotten there was room. Time feels different now. This is difficult to explain because time is supposed to feel the same. Time is supposed to be neutral, objective, measured in units that do not change. Seconds, minutes, hours, days. A minute now should feel like a minute 20 years ago. An hour should contain the same amount of living, the same capacity for experience. But it does not. Time has changed, or I have changed, or the relationship between us has shifted in a way that I cannot fully articulate. Only observe. When I was younger, and younger here means almost any time before the last decade, time felt like a resource being consumed. Each hour spent was an hour gone. Each day that ended was one less day remaining. I felt time leaving, constantly. The way one feels water draining from a bathtub, the level dropping while you stand there, unable to stop it, only able to measure how much is left. That feeling drove the rushing. That was the engine. I had to move fast because time was leaving, because there was not enough. Because standing still meant wasting what little I had. I do not feel that anymore. I do not feel time leaving. I feel time happening. The distinction is subtle, but important. Time leaving is a loss. Time happening is a presence. Time leaving demands hurry, demands efficiency, demands that every moment be used for maximum effect. Time happening asks nothing. Time happening simply is, and I am in it. And there is no shortage, no drain, no race against disappearance. I do not know when this shift occurred. I have tried to identify a turning point, a moment when the relationship changed, but I cannot find it. Perhaps it was gradual, so gradual that by the time I noticed, it was already complete. Perhaps there is no moment. Perhaps this is simply what happens when one lives long enough, when the accumulation of days reaches some threshold and the experience of time transforms. Or perhaps not. Perhaps this is not universal. Perhaps others my age still feel time leaving, still feel the drain, still rush against the current. I cannot know their experience. I can only know mine. And mine has changed. I sit in a morning, and the morning feels vast, not endless. I know it will end. I know the light will shift and the hour will pass. But vast in a way that makes ending seem less urgent. There is room for this coffee, this window, this silence. There is room for thought, for observation, for the slow turning of attention from one thing to another. I am not racing the morning. I am inside it. I remember mornings that felt like sprints, eyes open, feet on the floor, body in motion before the mind had fully awakened. The morning was something to get through, something to survive, an obstacle between sleep and the real business of the day. I did not sit in mornings. I did not dwell in them. I passed through them as quickly as possible, like a commuter passing through a train station, eyes fixed on the destination. The station itself just a blur. Now the morning is the destination. This is not philosophy. This is not something I read in a book or learned from a teacher. This is just what happens when I pay attention. When I sit still and let the morning be what it is, I find that it is enough, more than enough. I find that the hours hold more than I ever noticed when I was rushing through them. The quality of attention changes the experience of time. I think I always knew this theoretically, that moments tended to feel longer than moments ignored. But I did not know it practically. I did not know it in my body, in my days, in the texture of my actual life. I was too busy rushing to find out. Now I find out. An hour of sitting by the window contains more than an hour of rushing through tasks. The clock measures the same 60 minutes, but the interior experience is different. The sitting hour is dense, full, rich with observation. The rushing hour is thin, scattered, barely remembered, even as it ends. I do not know if this is compensation. I do not know if the expansion of the present is the universe's way of balancing the contraction of the future. I do not know if time offers more, as it prepares to offer less. I am suspicious of such narratives. They are too neat, too meaningful, too much like the kind of story we tell ourselves to make sense of what may have no sense. Perhaps the expansion is simpler. Perhaps it is just attention. Perhaps when we stop rushing, we see more. And seeing more feels like having more. And having more feels like time expanding. Perhaps the time was always this vast, this full, this present, and I simply could not perceive it through the blur of speed. I think about the years I cannot remember. There are so many of them. Entire seasons that have vanished. Entire months that left no trace. I know they happened. I have evidence, photographs, records, but I cannot recall them. They are gone the way dreams are gone. Present for a moment and then dissolved, leaving only the faintest impression that something once occurred. I wonder if those years felt like this. If those days contained the same vastness I now perceive. I wonder if the only difference is attention. If the time was always here, waiting to be noticed, and I was always too busy to notice. I cannot go back to find out. Those years are done. The rushing is over for those particular hours. What remains is what remains. And what remains is mostly nothing. But these hours, now, today, these I can perceive, these I can inhabit, and what I find when I inhabit them is that they are larger than I expected, larger than the clock suggests, larger than the old feeling of time as resource could ever accommodate. The afternoon arrives, and I am surprised. Already? I think. But the surprise is different from the old surprise. The old surprise was panic. Already? I haven't done enough. The new surprise is wonder. Already? It felt so long. The feeling of length without boredom. That is what I am trying to describe. The hours feel long, but the length is not oppressive. It is not the length of waiting rooms or traffic jams. The length of time that will not pass, of minutes that drag. It is the length of fullness of time that contains so much that it seems to stretch, to make room for everything it holds. I watch the light move across the floor. This is not a remarkable activity. Anyone could do it. The light moves, the shadows shift, the patterns change as the sun tracks its arc across the sky. But I watch it as though it were remarkable. I watch it the way one watches a fire, or a stream, or the clouds, with the kind of attention that does not require resolution, that asks nothing of its object, that simply remains. And the watching takes time. Real time. Felt time. Time that enters the body and becomes experience. When the light has finished its movement, when it has traveled from one end of the room to the other and finally disappeared. I am older than I was when it began, but I am also fuller. I have not just passed time, I have inhabited it. This is what the rushing prevented. Not just the seeing, though. It prevented that, too. But the inhabiting. The rushing kept me on the surface of time, skimming across the hours like a stone skipped across water, touching down briefly and then lifting again, never sinking, never entering the depth. Now I sink. Now I enter. And what I find, down here in the depth, is not emptiness. It is not the void I always feared. It is presence, texture, the weight of the actual, the feel of this moment, and this moment, and this moment. Each one distinct, each one sufficient. I do not know how long this will last. I do not know if this expanded experience of time is a permanent change or a phase, a gift of these particular years, or something I will carry forward for whatever years remain. I do not know if time will contract again, if the rushing will return, if some future circumstance will pull me back onto the surface. I only know that now, today, this afternoon, time feels different, larger, slower, more present. And I am in it, not racing through it. Here. I have been watching my hands, not in any systematic way, not with purpose or intention, just noticing, occasionally, what they are doing, how they are moving, the pace at which they accomplish their small tasks. My hands fold a towel. They do this slowly. The corners meet the fabric. Creases the hands press down along the fold, smoothing it flat. This takes time. This takes more time than it used to take, or more time than I remember it taking, though memory is not reliable. And perhaps it always took this long, and I simply never noticed. The folding itself is unremarkable. Thousands of towels have passed through these hands, tens of thousands, perhaps, over the decades. A trivial action, repeated so often it should have become invisible, should have vanished into the category of things done without thought, without attention, without any awareness of their happening. But I notice now, the hands know what to do. They do not require instruction. They lift and align, and fold and press, with a competence that belongs entirely to them, a knowledge stored in muscle and nerve, in the long memory of the body. I watch them as though watching someone else, someone I know well but have not really observed, someone who has been here all along, working quietly while I was busy looking elsewhere. The pace is unhurried. That is what strikes me. The hands do not rush the folding. They do not try to finish quickly so that the next task can begin. They move at their own speed, a speed that seems to match the task exactly, neither faster nor slower than necessary. I do not know if the hands have always moved this way. I do not know if the slowness is new, or if I am only now slow enough to perceive it. Perhaps the hands were always this patient, this careful, and I was the one who rushed them, who demanded they move faster, who imposed upon them an urgency they never felt. Or perhaps the hands are genuinely slower. Perhaps this is age, the body's natural deceleration, the gradual fading of the quick reflexes and rapid movements that once seemed automatic. Perhaps what I call patience is just physics, the inevitable slowing of systems that have been running for more than 7 decades. Either way, I do not resist it. The towel is folded. The hands move to the next one. The stack grows, one towel at a time, and I am not counting, not tracking, not measuring progress. I am only here, with the hands, with the fabric, with the small pleasure of corners meeting cleanly. I have begun to notice ordinary actions in this way, not just folding, but washing, carrying, opening, closing, the small movements that make up a day. The actions so familiar they usually pass beneath awareness. I see them now. I see the hand turning the faucet, the fingers gripping the handle, the wrist rotating with the turn. I see the arm reaching for the cup on the shelf, the shoulder adjusting, the elbow bending, the complex coordination of joints and muscles that allows a simple reach. I did not see these things before, or rather, I did not look. The actions happened, but I was elsewhere, in the future, in the past, in the list of things to do, in the next task pressing at the edge of attention. The body went about its business, and the mind raced ahead or circled back, rarely present to the movement happening in real time. Now the mind stays with the body. More often than it used to, the mind stays with the body. When the hands wash a dish, the mind is with the hands. When the feet walk across the room, the mind is with the feet. When the body sits, the mind sits. When the body waits, the mind waits. This is not meditation. I do not mean anything so formal. This is just attention. The ordinary kind. The kind that notices what is happening rather than imagining what should happen or remembering what did happen. It requires no technique. It requires only the absence of hurry. Without hurry, attention settles. Without the pressure to move on, awareness can rest on what is here. The hands become visible. The towel becomes visible. The room, the light, the quiet, all become visible. All enter perception in a way they could not. When perception was always leaning forward, always reaching for the next thing. I think about the tasks that used to feel burdensome. Laundry, dishes, cleaning, the maintenance of a life. The endless repetition of actions that undo themselves. The towels that become soiled after folding. The dishes that become dirty after washing. The floors that become dusty after sweeping. I used to resent this. I used to hurry through it, eager to be done. Eager to get to the real living that was supposed to happen afterward. But there was no afterward. There was only more maintenance, more repetition, more tasks that undid themselves. The resentment was a response to an illusion, the illusion that life was somewhere else, somewhere beyond the tasks, and that the tasks were obstacles rather than components. I do not resent the tasks now, not because I have learned some lesson about gratitude or mindfulness, not because I have convinced myself to find meaning in what is meaningless, just because the hurry is gone. And without the hurry, the resentment has no fuel. The tasks are just tasks. The towels are just towels. The folding is just folding. None of it is obstacle. None of it is in the way. I fold. The afternoon passes. The stack of towels grows and is eventually put away. Nothing has been accomplished in any grand sense. Nothing has been achieved, but the time has been inhabited. The hours have been lived. There is a way of carrying objects that I have noticed changing. When I was younger, I carried things efficiently. I loaded my arms, balanced multiple items, minimized trips. I carried with speed, with economy, with the implicit goal of finishing the carrying as quickly as possible. Now I carry one thing at a time. Not always, not absolutely, but more often than before. I carry the single cup to the sink. I carry the single book to the shelf. I carry the single bag of garbage to the bin and return empty-handed, not stopping to grab another task on the way. This is inefficient. By every standard of productivity, this is wrong. I am making more trips than necessary. I am using more time than required. I am failing to optimize. And yet, the inefficiency feels right. The single trip feels complete in itself. The carrying is not a means to an end, but a journey, however short, from here to there, from hand to destination. The return is not wasted motion, but arrival. A coming back to where I started, empty-handed and ready for whatever comes next. I do not know how to justify this. I do not know how to defend it against the voice that says, be efficient, save time, do more with less. I only know that the voice is quieter now, and in its absence, the single trip feels natural, feels like the only trip, feels like exactly what carrying should be. The objects themselves seem more present. The cup is heavy in my hand. The book has weight, texture, a particular smell of paper and binding. The garbage bag resists slightly as I lift it, and I notice the resistance, the way my muscles adjust, the way the body calibrates itself to each new load. I did not notice these things before, or if I noticed them, they were just information data points that allowed me to carry more efficiently, to adjust, grip and stance, to complete the task and move on. Now the noticing is its own activity. Now the information is not instrumental, but experiential. The weight is not just weight. It is the feel of weight, the presence of weight, the particular weight of this object at this moment. My tools feel different too. The hammer in the garage, the screwdriver, the wrench. I have used them for years without really perceiving them. They were means, not ends. They were extensions of intention, conduits for force, instruments for tasks that needed doing. But now I pick up the hammer and feel its handle. Feel the wood worn smooth by decades of grip. Feel the balance of the head, the way it wants to swing. I have not used the hammer lately. There is nothing that needs hammering. But I pick it up anyway, turn it over in my hands, notice it in a way I never did when I was rushing to use it. The kitchen knife is sharp in a particular way. The garden hose has a kink in a particular place. The chair by the window creaks when I shift my weight in a particular direction. These particularities were always there, but they were invisible, submerged beneath the urgency of function, beneath the demand that objects serve purposes rather than simply be. Now the objects simply are, and I am with them. This morning, I opened an envelope. Just a bill. Nothing important. Nothing that required thought or response, beyond the routine action of payment. But I noticed the opening, the finger sliding beneath the flap, the paper tearing along its edge, the small resistance, and then release as the seal gave way. It took seconds, and I was present for each of them. This is what the slowing has given me. Not wisdom, not insight, not any arrival at understanding. Just this, the presence of the ordinary, the visibility of what was always here. The towels are folded. The afternoon light has shifted. The room is quieter now. Or perhaps I am quieter, more able to perceive the quiet that was always underneath. My hands rest on the table, still at last. I have been watching other people, not intrusively, not with any agenda, just observing, from my window, from benches in public places, from the margins of gatherings, where I find myself less often now, but still, occasionally, present. I watch them move. I watch the pace of their bodies, the tilt of their shoulders, the rhythm of their steps. I watch the way they hold their phones, the way their eyes scan and dart, the way they seem to be here and somewhere else at the same time. They are rushing. Not all of them, not always, but many of them, much of the time. I see the lean forward, the quick steps, the face set in an expression that I recognize from inside. Myself the face of someone who has too much to do and not enough time. The face of someone racing a clock they cannot see. I do not judge this. I do not think they are wrong. I remember the feeling. I remember being the person leaning forward, the person with the quick steps, The person whose eyes were always scanning for the next thing. I remember believing that this was the only way to live, the only responsible way, the only way to keep up with a world that demanded constant motion. I do not believe that anymore, but I do not disbelieve it for others. Their lives are not my life. Their pressures are not my pressures. Perhaps they are rushing because they must, because real urgencies require their speed, because stopping would mean falling behind in ways that I no longer have to fear. Or perhaps they are rushing because I was rushing, because the habit is so deep, so pervasive, so woven into the fabric of how we live, that they do not know there is an alternative. Perhaps they have never experienced the stillness that comes when the rushing stops. Perhaps they cannot imagine it, just as I could not imagine it until it happened. I watch a young woman on the sidewalk. She is walking fast, phone in hand, bag over shoulder. She weaves between slower pedestrians, her path a zigzag of small evasions, her attention split between the screen and the obstacles ahead. She does not look up at the trees. She does not notice the sky. She is a vector of intention, a line drawn from origin to destination, everything between just interference. I do not pity her. That would be condescending. I do not wish she would slow down. That would be presumptuous. I only observe that she is moving the way I used to move, and that I no longer move that way, and that the difference is something I still do not fully understand. There is a man on a bench in the park near my house. He is old, older than me, perhaps, though age becomes harder to estimate the older one gets. He sits with his hands in his lap, looking at the water. He has been sitting for half an hour now, maybe longer. He does not check his phone, because he does not seem to have a phone. He does not rise and move, because there is nowhere, apparently, that he needs to be. I do not know what he is thinking. I do not know if he is at peace or in despair, if the sitting is pleasure or endurance, if the stillness is chosen, or simply what happens when movement becomes difficult. I do not project onto him. I only notice that he is there, and that his presence is different from the rushing presences that pass behind him. The joggers and the cyclists, and the parents with strollers, all of them moving, always moving. He and I are alike in this. We are still while others move. I do not know if this is wisdom. I do not know if stillness at our age is an achievement or simply a default, the what's left when the energy for rushing fades. I suspect it is both, and neither, and something else entirely that does not fit the categories I know. There is a child in the park, too. A girl, maybe 4 or 5, running in the way children run, not toward anything, not away from anything, just running for the joy of motion, for the feel of legs moving and air rushing and the ground scrolling beneath. She falls, rises, runs again. She is not rushing. Rushing implies destination, purpose, the pressure of arrival. She is just moving. I watch her and remember movement like that. I must have moved that way once, though I cannot recall it. Before the lists, before the deadlines, before the weight of tasks accumulated. I must have run for running, moved for moving, been a body in joyful motion without any goal beyond the motion itself. And now, at the other end of life, I have something similar. Not the running the body does not run anymore, but the purposelessness. The moving without rushing, the sitting without waiting, the being without becoming. The child and the old man on the bench are alike in this. Neither is going anywhere. The child because arrival is not yet a concept. The old man because arrival has ceased to matter. In the middle, the rushing people, the vectors of intention, the purposeful trajectories from here to there. I was in the middle for a long time. I am not anymore. I think about the people still rushing, still working, still building and achieving and producing. I do not resent them. I do not feel superior to them. They are living their lives at their pace, for their reasons, in their time. Some of them may never slow down. Some of them may not want to. Some of them may rush until the last moment. And perhaps that is right for them. Perhaps that is the way their lives are meant to be lived. I cannot know. I can only know my own experience. The rushing, and then the gradual fading. And now the stillness that is not vacancy, but presence. There is a couple walking on the path by the water. They are holding hands. They are moving slowly, not from infirmity, but from attention. They are looking at the water, the birds, the light. They stop to watch a duck dive and resurface. They laugh about something I cannot hear. They are not rushing. They are together in time, which is different from together in space. Anyone can be in the same place. To be in the same time requires attention, requires pace, requires the willingness to not hurry ahead, to not lag behind, to move at the speed of the other. I think about the people I used to walk with, partners, friends, colleagues. I think about how often we were not really walking together, how often one of us was leaning ahead while the other caught up, how often the walk was not a shared experience, but two separate trajectories that happened to run parallel. The rushing made partnership difficult. The rushing made me a poor companion, always slightly elsewhere, always slightly impatient, always slightly aware of the time passing and the tasks waiting. I could not match pace with someone else because I could not match pace with myself. I was always ahead of my own body, dragging it forward toward destinations it had not yet imagined. Now I can match pace. Now I can walk beside someone when there is someone to walk beside, and be present to the walking, not just the arriving. Now the conversation can unfold at its own speed, without my need to hurry it toward conclusion. Now the silence between sentences can last as long as it needs to last, without my rushing to fill it. This is not a skill I learned. This is not an improvement I made. This is just what happened when the urgency faded. The ability to be with another person in time, truly in time, emerged from the absence of the thing that had been preventing it. I watch a group of teenagers on the corner. They are loud, gesturing, laughing. They seem to have all the time in the world. They seem to be in no hurry to be anywhere but here, on this corner, with each other. They are young enough to not yet have learned the rushing, or perhaps they are rushing in ways I cannot see, in the speed of their thoughts, the pressure of their ambitions, the invisible lists already forming in their minds. I cannot know. I can only know that from here, from this bench, they look like they have time. They look like the afternoon is long and the evening is far away, and there is no reason to do anything but stand here, on this corner, and be young together. I had afternoons like that, somewhere in the past, before the rushing started. I had afternoons that lasted forever, that contained nothing but presence, that were complete in themselves without needing to accomplish anything. I cannot remember them clearly. The memory is more like a feeling than a picture, a sense of spaciousness, of time without edges, of being exactly where I was without needing to be somewhere else. And now I have afternoons like that again. Not in the same way. I am not young. The afternoons are not crowded with friends. The laughter is quieter, when there is laughter at all. But the spaciousness is here. The time without edges is here. The being exactly where I am is here. The rushing people pass. The child runs and falls and rises. The old man on the bench does not move. The couple by the water holds hands. And I sit, watching, without hurry, not judging, not comparing, just observing that there are different ways to be in time, different paces, different relationships to the hours as they pass. Mine has changed. I do not know why. But I am content. No, not content. That word implies satisfaction, implies that something has been resolved. I am present, present to this bench, this park, this afternoon, present to the question that remains. Why does urgency fade? I do not answer it. I do not need to answer it. I only sit with it, while the others rush past. There is a silence that comes when urgency fades. It is not the silence of nothing happening. It is the silence of not needing anything to happen. A silence that is full rather than empty, present rather than absent. The kind of silence that one enters like a room, like a space with its own qualities and textures. I did not know this silence for most of my life. I knew quiet, the quiet of late nights, when the tasks were done. The quiet of early mornings before the demands began. But that was a pause between noises, a gap in the schedule, a temporary reprieve. It was not this. This is a silence that does not end. Not literally, there are still sounds. The clock ticks, the refrigerator hums, the birds outside mark the morning with their calls. But underneath the sounds, or perhaps alongside them, there is a stillness that does not lift. A stillness that is not waiting for the next thing, but is simply here, settled, continuous. I have been living in this silence for some time now. I do not know exactly when it began. Like everything else, it arrived gradually, sneaking in at the edges, filling the spaces that used to be occupied by urgency, by the mental chatter of lists and plans, by the constant hum of what next, and what if, and hurry up. The silence is not empty, because I am in it. My thoughts move through it, slowly, like fish through deep water. My attention rests on things, and then moves on, without pressure, without demand. The silence holds all of this, holds me, holds the thoughts, holds the slow passage of the day. I used to fear silence. I did not know I feared it, but looking back, I can see the avoidance. The radio always on in the car, the television providing background noise, the constant checking of phones, of messages, of anything that would fill the quiet before it became oppressive. I treated silence like an enemy, something to be warded off, something that would swallow me if I let it in. And now I live in it. The fear was misplaced. Or perhaps the fear was appropriate to who I was then, and simply does not apply to who I am now. The silence I feared was the silence of emptiness. The silence that would reveal there was nothing there. No purpose, no meaning, no reason to continue. I rushed to avoid that silence, to fill it with motion and noise, and the reassuring busyness of a life that was, at least, happening. But this silence is not empty. This silence is where I find the day. It is where the morning light becomes visible, where the texture of the hours becomes palpable, where the small events of an ordinary life, the coffee, the window, the walk around the block, become sufficient. The silence does not reveal emptiness. It reveals presence. I sit in a chair. The room is quiet. The clock ticks, that same clock I mentioned before, still there, still marking time in its patient way. The tick enters the silence and is absorbed by it, becomes part of it, does not disrupt it. The silence is large enough to hold the ticking, large enough to hold everything. I think about the noise I used to create, the mental noise, mostly the running commentary, the self-talk, the endless analysis and planning and reviewing. My mind was a loud place. It was crowded with voices, my own voice in multiple registers, arguing and worrying and strategizing. I did not know how to turn it down. I did not know there was a volume control. The volume is lower now. Not silent. The mind still speaks, still comments, still occasionally worries about things that probably do not need worrying about. But the commentary is quieter, less insistent, more like a voice in another room than a voice shouting in my ear. I can hear it without being commanded by it. I can notice a thought without believing that the thought is the whole truth. This came with the fading of urgency. Or perhaps it is the same thing as the fading of urgency, just from another angle. When there is no rush, the mind has less to do. When there is no pressure to figure everything out right now, to plan the next move, to prepare for the next challenge, the mind can rest. And in the resting, the volume drops. I do not know if this is age. I do not know if brains naturally quiet as they get older, if there is some neurological dimming that corresponds to what I experience. Perhaps the scientists could tell me. Perhaps there are studies, data, explanations that would make sense of this inner silence. But I do not need the explanation. I have the silence itself. I have the experience of sitting in it, living in it, finding it sufficient. There are things I no longer need to understand. This is part of the silence too. The absence of the compulsion to figure everything out. For most of my life, I approached questions like problems to be solved. A question was a gap, an incompleteness, something wrong that needed to be made right through understanding. I rushed toward answers the way I rushed toward everything else with urgency, with determination, with the belief that not knowing was a failure and knowing was success. Now I can sit with not knowing. The question of why urgency fades. This question I have been circling throughout these hours of reflection. I do not need to answer it. The question is here. The question is interesting, but the question does not demand resolution. It can remain open, like a door that does not need to be closed, like a window that lets in the air. This is strange to me, even now. A lifetime of rushing toward answers, and now the capacity to not rush, to let the question be a question, to find the not knowing interesting rather than intolerable. The silence holds this, too. The silence holds the questions that remain unanswered, holds them without judgment, without pressure, without the insistence that something must be done. I have been reading less lately, not because I have lost interest in books, but because the reading feels different now. A book is a companion, not a task. A book is something to sit with, not something to finish. I read a few pages and then put the book down, not from boredom, but from sufficiency. The few pages are enough for now. They enter the silence and become part of it. I do not need to rush to the end. This would have been unthinkable before. Before, a book was a project. Beginning a book meant committing to finishing it. Stopping in the middle was failure, was waste, was an admission that the time already spent had been poorly invested. I read with the urgency of completion, pushing through pages to reach the end, to cross another book off the list, to prove that I had done what I set out to do. Now there is no list. There is no proof required. There is only the reading, and then the not reading, and then whatever comes next. The silence between activities is not dead time. That is another discovery, or another observation. The gaps between doing things are not empty. They are not waste. They are part of the day, as real as the doing itself, as worthy of attention. I finish a cup of coffee and sit with the empty cup. I do not rise immediately. I do not move on. I sit with the finishing, with the afterness, with the quiet that follows the small activity. This sitting is not nothing. It is a continuation. It is part of the coffee drinking, in a way. The part that comes after, but is still connected. The silence allows this. The silence allows the spaces between. I notice pauses more than I used to. Pauses in conversation. Pauses in thought. Pauses in movement. These used to be gaps to be filled, silences to be broken, stillnesses to be overcome. Now, they are their own events. Now the pause is as present as what surrounds it. A conversation ends, and we sit in the silence that follows. The silence is not awkward. The silence is not a failure to find more words. The silence is what happens when the words have said what they needed to say. We sit in it together, two people in the same room, in the same quiet. I have lost friends who could not tolerate this silence. Or perhaps I lost them to other things. Distance, circumstance, the natural drifting apart that happens over decades. But I notice that the friends who remain are the ones who can sit in silence, who do not need constant conversation, who understand that presence does not require noise. We sit together and look out the window. We drink our tea. We comment occasionally on something: the bird at the feeder, the weather, a memory that surfaces, but we do not need to fill every moment. The moments are already full. This is what the fading of urgency makes possible. Not the silence itself. The silence was always there, but the capacity to be in it, to rest in it, to find it sufficient. I think about the noise of the world outside, the traffic, the construction, the endless hum of activity. The world is louder than it was when I was young. Or perhaps I am just more aware of it now that the inside is quieter. The contrast is sharp. Out there, the rushing continues. The urgency proliferates. The noise grows. In here, the silence settles. I do not close myself off from the world. I am not a hermit, not a recluse. I go out. I engage. I participate in the noise when participation is required. But I come back to the silence. I return to it like one returns home after a journey, relieved, grateful, ready to rest. The silence is where I live now, not alone. The silence is not loneliness. The silence is simply quiet. And in the quiet, I am present. And in the presence, there is no emptiness, no void, no terrifying absence. There is only this. The clock ticks. The afternoon deepens, and I remain. I do not know why urgency fades. I have circled this question for hours now, for days, for what feels like the entirety of this stretched and slowing time. I have described its absence. I have remembered its presence. I have observed its effects and noted its withdrawal. But I have not answered the question, and I am not certain the question has an answer. Not the kind of answer that can be stated and understood and then set aside as solved. Perhaps urgency fades because the body fades. The same slowing that makes my hands move more carefully, that makes my steps more measured, that makes rising from a chair an act that requires attention rather than an automatic response. Perhaps this same slowing extends to the interior, to the mind, to the engine that once drove the rushing. Perhaps urgency is energy, and energy diminishes. And what feels like a change in perspective is really just a change in capacity. I do not know. I am suspicious of this explanation because it reduces everything to mechanism. It says you stopped rushing because you ran out of fuel. It says the stillness is not a discovery, but a limitation. It says there is nothing to learn here, only a body winding down. And yet, I cannot dismiss it. The body is slowing. The energy is less than it was. Perhaps all my talk of presence and silence and the visibility of the ordinary is just the story I tell myself to make the limitation meaningful. Perhaps I would rush if I could. And I call it choice only because the rushing is no longer possible. But this does not feel true. It does not feel true because I remember the rushing. And it was not joyful. It was not the expression of abundant energy looking for outlet. It was compulsive, driven, anxious. I rushed not because I had extra speed to spend, but because I feared what would happen if I stopped. The rushing was not excess. It was defense. So perhaps urgency fades because the defense is no longer needed. Perhaps something has changed in my relationship to the fears that drove me. The fear of falling behind. The fear of being forgotten, the fear of missing out, the fear of death itself, rushing toward me, no matter how fast I ran. Perhaps the fears are still there, but they have softened, or I have made some kind of peace with them. And in the peace, the urgency releases. I do not know. I am suspicious of this explanation too, because it makes the fading sound like achievement. It sounds like I have grown, I have learned. I have arrived at acceptance, and I am not sure that is true. I am not sure I have learned anything that I could teach someone else. I am not sure I have arrived anywhere that could be pointed to on a map. Perhaps the fading just happened. Perhaps it is what time does to urgency, erodes it, wears it down, like water wearing down stone. Perhaps the decades themselves are the mechanism, and there is no insight, no wisdom. Just the relentless accumulation of days until the rushing no longer makes sense. Perhaps young people rush and old people do not. Not because old people are wiser, but because old people have less future to rush toward, and the present becomes more compelling by default. I do not know. I sit with the not knowing. I have become good at this, or at least better. The not knowing does not agitate me the way it once would have. It does not feel like failure. It feels like the natural state of things, the honest condition of a mind trying to understand something that may be beyond understanding. Why does urgency fade? The question hovers. It does not demand resolution. I think about the stories we tell about aging, the stories of wisdom gained, of peace attained, of turbulent youth giving way to serene age. These stories are comfort. They suggest that the losses of aging, the fading energy, the shrinking future, the deaths of friends and family are compensated by gains in understanding, by arrivals at insight, by the discovery of truths that were hidden while we were too busy rushing to see them. I do not know if these stories are true. They may be partly true. There may be something gained, something that balances, something that makes the ending feel less like an ending and more like a destination. But I am wary of believing too strongly. of telling myself that I have found what the rushing prevented me from finding. That would be too neat. That would be the kind of answer I suspect does not exist. Perhaps the fading of urgency is neither gain nor loss. Perhaps it is simply change. The way winter changes to spring. The way morning changes to afternoon. The way everything changes. Constantly. Without justification. Without explanation. I rushed. And then I rushed less. And now, I do not rush. The change happened. It continues to happen. And beneath the change, beneath the question of why, there is only the experience of the change itself. I am sitting in a room in the late afternoon. The light has turned golden. The way light turns in these hours. The slant different from morning. The shadows longer. I have been here all day, thinking, not rushing, present to the question that will not be answered, and I find that I am content to remain here. Not content in the sense of satisfied, of resolved, of finally at peace. Content in the sense of willing to be here, with this question, with this silence, with this slow fading of the light. The urgency that would have pushed me to resolve things, to find the answer, to close the question and move on. That urgency is absent. In its absence, the question can be what it is, a question, not a problem, not a challenge, not something that must be conquered, just a wondering, a curiosity, a shape that my attention takes when it has nowhere else to go. Why does urgency fade? I do not know. And perhaps that is what I have to offer. Not an answer, but a companionship with the question. Not a resolution, but a demonstration that resolution is not required. The question can remain open. The wondering can continue. Life does not depend on answers the way I once believed it did. I used to think that to not know was to not yet know, that all unknowing was temporary, that answers were out there waiting to be found, that sufficient effort and intelligence would eventually reveal everything. This was the faith of the rushing mind, the belief that kept the urgency alive. If I could just move fast enough, far enough, long enough, I would arrive at understanding. I do not believe that anymore. Not because I have given up, not because I have surrendered to ignorance, just because I have noticed that some questions do not have the kind of answers I was looking for. Some questions are not gates to be passed through on the way to somewhere else. Some questions are places to live, rooms to inhabit, landscapes to explore without ever reaching an edge. Why does urgency fade? This is such a question. This is a place, not a gate. This is where I am, not where I am going. The afternoon continues. The golden light deepens. Soon it will be evening, and the light will shift again, and the day will move toward its ending. I do not rush toward the ending. I do not anticipate the evening. I am here, in the afternoon, in the light that is present now, and the present is where I will stay, until the present becomes something else. This is not mastery. This is not achievement. This is only what happens when the rushing stops. The room holds me. The silence holds me. The question holds me. And I remain. The morning returns. It is early. The light gray. The house quiet. I woke without alarm, as I have done for years now. The body knowing its own rhythms. The sleep ending when it ends without any push from me. I lie in bed and feel the weight of the covers. The ceiling is familiar. The cracks in the plaster unchanged from yesterday, from last year, from a decade ago. I have spent thousands of mornings in this room, looking at this ceiling, beginning days that led to this day. I do not know how many mornings remain. I say that simply, without fear, without self-pity. It is just what is true. The mornings are numbered, as they always were, and the number has grown smaller. This morning is one of the remaining. Tomorrow, if it comes, will be another. And somewhere, on some future morning, the count will reach its end. I used to rush because of this. The limited number of mornings was precisely what drove the urgency. If there are only so many, the logic went, then each one must be used fully, efficiently, productively. To waste a morning was to waste something precious, something that could not be recovered. But I do not feel that anymore. The morning is precious. That has not changed. This morning with its gray light and its familiar ceiling and its quiet, is precious beyond measure. But the precious does not demand speed. The precious does not require efficient use. The precious is not diminished by slowness. I lie in bed for a while longer. There is no reason to rise immediately. There is no list waiting. The coffee can wait. The window can wait. Everything that will happen today can wait until I am ready. This is not laziness. This is not giving up. This is only a different relationship to time. A relationship that does not hurry even as the hours dwindle. Eventually, I rise. The body moves slowly, stiffly, the way it moves in these early hours before the joints warm and the muscles remember their work. I stand at the window and look out at the street, still empty, the day not yet begun for most. The light will shift. The cars will begin to pass. The world will wake and resume its rushing, its urgency, its endless motion toward goals I can no longer see clearly. And I will be here, moving slowly, not rushed. Why does urgency fade? The question is still here. It did not go away overnight. It did not resolve itself while I slept. It remains, present, patient, asking nothing. I pour water into the kettle. I light the flame. I wait. The waiting is not hard. The waiting is not boring. The waiting is just what happens between the lighting and the boiling, and I am present to it. And that is enough. I think about the people I have known who rushed until the end. Some of them rushed because they loved what they were doing, because the work was its own reward, because the motion was joy rather than compulsion. Some of them rushed because they could not imagine stopping, because the rushing had become so identified with who they were that to stop would have been to disappear. I do not know which is better. I do not know if my slowing is the right way to approach these years. Perhaps the rushers were right. Perhaps filling every moment with purpose and motion is exactly what one should do when the moments are few. Perhaps my stillness is a kind of waste, a failure to make the most of what remains. But I do not feel that. I do not feel that I am wasting anything. I feel that I am finally, after decades of rushing, actually living the moments I have. Not efficiently, not productively, not in any way that could be measured or counted or justified. Just living them, being in them, present. The kettle boils. I make the coffee. I carry the cup to the window and sit. The street is beginning to wake. A car passes. A neighbor emerges, walks to their car, drives away. The day is beginning, for them and for me. And the hours will pass, whether I rush or not. I will not rush. I will sit here, with this coffee, with this window, with this question that will not be answered. The morning light is changing now, the gray giving way to something warmer. The sun is rising, as it has risen every morning of my life, as it will rise on the morning I do not see. I watch it without hurry, and the day begins.